The secret that shatters everything. Sidwell's twisted paternity bombshell rocks Port Charles. Britt Westburn thought she had escaped her darkest chapter. After months of captivity at the Five Poppies laboratory, Jason Morgan had successfully extracted her from Croatia, bringing her back to Port Charles in early September. She had survived the trauma, the manipulation, and the forced labor under Jen Sidwell's watchful eye. But as Britt attempted to rebuild her life in the familiar streets of her hometown, she had no idea that the most devastating revelation was still waiting to destroy everything she thought she knew about herself. The October air in Port Charles carried an unusual tension as Jason Morgan continued his investigation into Sidwell's operations. Despite Britt's physical escape from Five Poppies months earlier, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper connected Sidwell to Britt, something beyond blackmail, beyond mere criminal opportunism. The way Sidwell had fixated on her, the specific nature of his control, the experimental medications he'd provided for her Huntington's disease, none of it aligned with typical criminal behavior. What Jason uncovered would change everything. The investigation intensifies. In the weeks following Britt's return to Port Charles, Jason had been quietly gathering intelligence on Sidwell's background. The criminal mastermind had been careful to obscure his past, but Jason's connections to various intelligence agencies provided access to files most people would never see. It was during a late-night session reviewing old DVX documents that Jason stumbled upon something that made his blood run cold. Buried in a classified folder marked Project Bloodline was a DNA analysis report dated decades ago. The document had been sealed by DVX operatives and hidden away, likely because of its explosive implications. The maternal name listed was unmistakable, Liesl Obricht, but the paternal match wasn't Caesar Faison, as the world had believed for over 40 years. It was Jen Sidwell. Jason sat back in his chair, his mind racing through the implications. If this was true, then everything about Britt's identity was built on a lie. Caesar Faison, the madman, the villain whose shadow had haunted Britt her entire life, was not her biological father. Sidwell was, and if Sidwell had recently discovered this truth, it explained everything about his obsession with capturing and controlling Britt at Five Poppies. The next morning, Jason knew he couldn't keep this information to himself. Britt deserved to know the truth, no matter how devastating it might be. Confronting the impossible truth, Jason found Britt at Bobby's, where she'd been trying to establish some semblance of normalcy in her post-Five Poppies life. She looked up as he approached, and something in his expression immediately put her on guard. "We need to talk," Jason said quietly, sliding into the booth across from her. "Somewhere private." Britt's jaw tightened. "If this is about Croatia again, I've told you everything I know about Sidwell's operation. I was kept in the dark about most of it." "It's not about the operation," Jason replied. "It's about you. About your family." 20 minutes later, they sat in a secured room at the PCPD, courtesy of Anna Devane, who had been briefed on the situation. Jason laid out the evidence, the DVX files, the DNA reports, the timeline that aligned perfectly with Liesl Obricht's relationship history. Britt stared at the documents spread across the table, her face pale. "This has to be a mistake. Some kind of forgery. Sidwell is manipulating evidence to mess with my head." "I thought the same thing," Jason admitted, "but I had Anna verify everything through WSB channels. The DNA samples were authentic, collected years ago during routine DVX surveillance operations. This isn't new information, Britt. It's old truth that was deliberately buried." Britt's hands trembled as she picked up one of the reports. "My mother," she whispered. "She knew. She had to have known." Jason nodded grimly. "The timeline suggests Liesl was involved with Sidwell before she met Faison. When she got pregnant, she made a choice to claim Faison as the father because he had more power, more resources. Sidwell was just an operative back then. Faison was already a legend in the criminal underworld. So my entire life has been a lie." Britt's voice was barely audible. "Everything I believed about myself, every piece of my identity, it's all wrong." Sidwell's discovery. What Jason and Britt didn't know yet was that Sidwell himself had only recently uncovered the truth. The revelation had come about through an unexpected avenue, the mysterious return of Nathan West to Port Charles. When the man claiming to be Nathan reappeared, Sidwell, always opportunistic and suspicious, had obtained DNA samples to verify his identity. The results were shocking. This Nathan was not genetically related to Caesar Faison as everyone believed. The discovery prompted Sidwell to dig deeper into the Faison family tree, running comparison analyses against various family members. It was during these tests that Sidwell made the connection to Britt. When he ran his own DNA against the Faison offspring samples he'd collected, he discovered a familial match to Britt Westburn. Further analysis confirmed what the old DVX files had documented decades earlier. He was Britt's biological father. The knowledge had transformed Sidwell's entire worldview. He had lived his life as a criminal mastermind, a man without meaningful personal connections, focused solely on power and control. But now he had a daughter, a brilliant, accomplished daughter, who had lived her entire life believing she was someone else's child. Everything that followed his purchase of Windermere, his elaborate schemes targeting Port Charles, his acquisition of the Five Poppies operation had been orchestrated with one hidden purpose: to bring him closer to Britt, to create circumstances where he could control and protect her, even if she could never know why. The confrontation at Windermere. Sidwell had maintained a low profile since Britt's escape from Five Poppies, but he hadn't left Port Charles. He'd been watching from the shadows, ensuring she was safe, monitoring her health, waiting for the right moment to reveal himself. That moment came when Britt, armed with the truth Jason had uncovered, stormed into Windermere demanding answers. She found Sidwell in the study, almost as if he'd been expecting her. "Is it true?" Britt demanded, her voice shaking with fury. "Are you my father?" Sidwell stood slowly, his usual composed demeanor cracking slightly. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, and in his eyes, Britt saw confirmation even before he spoke. "Yes," he said quietly, "I am." The simple admission hung in the air like a grenade. Britt felt her knees go weak, but she refused to sit, refused to show any vulnerability in front of this man. "You knew," she spat, "when you held me captive at Five Poppies, when you forced me to work in that laboratory, when you controlled every aspect of my life, you knew you were my father, and you did it anyway." "I did it because I am your father," Sidwell countered, his voice taking on an edge. "Your mother stole you from me before I even knew you existed. She lied to everyone, let you grow up believing Faison's madness ran through your veins. Everything I did was to protect you, to keep you close, to ensure you survived. By imprisoning me," Britt's voice rose to a shout, "by threatening me, by using my illness against me. That's not protection, that's abuse. I gave you medication that extended your life," Sidwell shot back. "The experimental treatments Dalton and I developed have slowed your Huntington's progression by years. Without them, you'd already be losing cognitive function. I saved your life, Britt." The words hit Britt like a physical blow. She knew it was true. The medications she'd been taking had been remarkably effective, far beyond anything standard treatment could provide. But the cost of that treatment had been her freedom, her autonomy, months of her life spent in captivity. "You had no right," she said, her voice breaking, "no right to make those decisions for me. No right to control me. No right to play God with my life just because you share my DNA." Liesl's reckoning. News of the paternity and relation spread through Port Charles like wildfire. When Liesl Obrick learned that the truth had finally emerged, she found herself facing the consequences of a lie she'd maintained for over 40 years. Nathan confronted his mother first, his own recent traumas making him less forgiving of her manipulations. "You knew," he said coldly. "All these years, you let Britt believe Faison was her father. You let her carry that burden, that legacy, when it was all a lie." "I did what was necessary," Liesl protested, her usual bravado crumbling. "Faison could provide protection, resources, everything we needed. Sidwell was nobody back then, just another operative the DVX would have eventually burned. I made the choice that was best for my child. You made the choice that was best for you," Nathan corrected. "And now Britt is paying the price." Sidwell used your lie to justify holding her prisoner. He manipulated her, controlled her, all while believing he was being a father. This is your fault, mother. All of it. When Britt finally agreed to see Liesl, the confrontation was devastating. The two women met at the Metro Court, in a private room where their raised voices couldn't be overheard. How could you? Britt demanded, tears streaming down her face. How could you lie to me for my entire life? Everything I thought I knew about myself was wrong. Do you have any idea what that feels like? Liesl reached for her daughter's hand, but Britt pulled away. I was protecting you, Liesl insisted. Faison was powerful. He could give you opportunities, security. He was a monster, Britt shouted. I spent my entire life believing I was the daughter of a madman. I carried that shame, that stigma, thinking his insanity might be coded into my DNA. And now you tell me it was all a lie because you wanted a social climb. It wasn't like that, Liesl said, but her voice lacked conviction. Then what was it like? Britt challenged. Tell me the truth, mother. For once in your life, just tell me the truth. The laboratory's dark purpose. As the paternity drama unfolded, Anna Devane and Jason continued investigating the full scope of what Sidwell and Professor Hank Dalton had been developing at Five Poppies. What they uncovered was even more disturbing than they'd feared. The laboratory hadn't just been creating experimental Huntington's medications. They'd been developing an entire line of designer pharmaceuticals capable of controlling neural function, modifying memories, and enhancing physical capabilities. The implications were terrifying in the wrong hands. These drugs could be weaponized, used to control populations, erase inconvenient truths, or create super soldiers. And Britt had been at the center of it all, analyzing the data that made these breakthroughs possible. She had been kept in the dark about the true applications of her work, but her brilliant mind had been essential to Sidwell's success. When Jason showed her the full extent of what had been created using her research, Britt felt physically ill. I didn't know, she whispered, staring at the classified reports. I thought I was just working on medical treatments. I didn't know it would be used like this. Sidwell made sure you didn't know, Jason said gently. He wanted to use your skills without making you complicit in his crimes. In his twisted way, he thought he was protecting you. But Britt couldn't accept that rationalization. He used me, made me a weapon against my will, and he did it all while calling himself my father. Sidwell's ultimatum. As pressure mounted from the PCPD and WSB investigations, Sidwell made a desperate gamble. He demanded a meeting with Port Charles authorities, offering to surrender himself and provide full disclosure of his operations on one condition. Britt needs to continue her treatment, he stated flatly, standing before Anna Devane, Jason Morgan, and Commissioner Jordan Ashford. The medications I've developed are the only thing keeping her Huntington's at bay. If she stops taking them, she'll deteriorate rapidly. I'll give you everything, all my research, all my resources, full cooperation, but she has to be allowed to continue the treatment protocol. Under supervision, Anna countered. We're not letting you have unsupervised access to her ever again. Agreed, Sidwell said without hesitation. I'll submit to house arrest here in Port Charles. Britt can visit under guard for her treatments. I'll face whatever charges you bring against me. But please let me give her this. Let me be her father in the only way I know how. Britt, who had been standing in the back of the room, stepped forward. I don't want his help, she said coldly. I don't want anything from him. Then you'll die, Sidwell said bluntly, turning to face her. Within 18 months, maybe 2 years, the Huntingtons will progress to the point where you lose motor function, cognitive ability, everything that makes you who you are. The standard treatments can't stop that. Only what I've developed can give you more time. Time as what? Britt challenged. As your prisoner, your puppet, your daughter, who's supposed to be grateful for all the ways you've manipulated and controlled her. Time as yourself, Sidwell replied, and for the first time, genuine emotion cracked through his cold exterior. Time to live, to practice medicine, to love and be loved. I took months from you, Britt. Let me give you years back. An impossible choice. The authorities gave Britt time to make her decision. It was an impossible choice, continue the treatments that were extending her life but tether herself to the father who had imprisoned her, or maintain her independence knowing her time was limited. She found herself sitting with Jason at Bobby's late one night, wrestling with the decision. "What would you do?" she asked him. Jason was quiet for a long moment. "I can't answer that. This isn't about survival versus principle, it's about what kind of life you want to live with the time you have." "He says he loves me," Britt said softly, "that everything he did came from love. But love doesn't look like prison cells and ankle monitors and forced labor, does it?" "No," Jason agreed. "But love also doesn't mean you have to die to prove a point. If the treatment works, if it gives you more time, maybe you can find a way to accept it without accepting him." Britt looked at her hands, already showing the slight tremor that signaled her disease's progression. "I don't know if I can separate the two. Every dose of medication would be a reminder that I'm dependent on the man who hurt me, that my father and my captor are the same person. Then you need to decide what you can live with," Jason said gently, literally and figuratively, returning to 5 poppies. In a twist that shocked everyone, Britt made an unexpected decision. She would continue the treatment, but on her terms. She demanded full transparency about what the medications contained, wanted independent medical oversight, and insisted that Professor Dalton, not Sidwell, supervise her care. But there was another condition. She wanted to return to 5 poppies, not as a prisoner, but as a researcher. She would help ensure that the Huntington's treatment was properly documented, tested, and eventually made available to other patients suffering from the disease. "If I'm going to be dependent on this medication anyway," she told Anna and Jason, "then I'm going to make sure it helps people beyond just me. Sidwell used my work for his criminal empire. I'm going to reclaim it and use it for actual good." It was a bold plan, and not everyone agreed with it. Carly Spencer, in particular, was vocal in her opposition, seeing it as Britt walking back into danger. "You're letting him win," Carly argued during a heated exchange at the Metro Court. "He imprisoned you, manipulated you, and now you're voluntarily going back to work for him." "I'm not working for him," Britt corrected coldly. "I'm working for the hundreds of thousands of people worldwide who suffer from Huntington's and deserve access to a treatment that might extend their lives. Sidwell doesn't get credit for that. I do." The tension between Britt and Carly had always been complicated, largely centered on their shared history with Jason. Now, with Britt back in Port Charles and apparently willing to maintain some connection to Sidwell for medical reasons, that tension reached new heights. Sidwell's true motives. As arrangements were made for Britt's return to 5 poppies and under strict WSB supervision, questions lingered about Sidwell's ultimate motives. Was he truly a changed man, motivated by paternal love? Or was this elaborate scheme simply another manipulation, with Britt as his ultimate prize? Jason remained deeply suspicious. "A man like Sidwell doesn't change overnight," he warned Britt before she left for Croatia. "He's playing a long game, and you're at the center of it." "I know," Britt replied. "But for once, I'm not a pawn. I'm making my own choices, even if they're complicated ones." What none of them realized was that Sidwell's plans extended far beyond simple paternity. The revelation about Britt being his daughter had been convenient, a useful emotional lever. But his true goal involved something far more ambitious, using the research from 5 poppies to create a new power base, one that couldn't be touched by traditional law enforcement because it was cloaked in humanitarian medical research. With Britt back at the laboratory, working voluntarily under supervision, Sidwell had the perfect cover for continuing his work, and with the paternity elation giving him a permanent emotional connection to his most brilliant researcher, he'd ensured she could never fully walk away. Nathan's investigation. While Britt grappled with her impossible situation, Nathan West, whose own mysterious return had inadvertently triggered Sidwell's paternity discovery, began his own investigation into Sidwell's background. There was something about the DNA tests that didn't sit right with Nathan. If he wasn't Faison's biological son, then whose son was he? And why had he been held captive, experimented on, and sent back to Port Charles with fragmented memories? His investigation led him to a disturbing possibility. Sidwell might be connected to the conspiracy that had faked Nathan's death years earlier. If Sidwell had known about the Faison family secrets, if he'd been investigating his own potential connection to Liesl's children, then he might have been involved in the plot from the beginning. Nathan confronted Dana Falconeri, his former partner, with his theory. What if my death was never about Faison at all? What if it was about Sidwell wanting to investigate the family without interference? He could have arranged the shooting, staged my death, kept me captive for years while he ran tests and gathered intelligence. Danta was skeptical but agreed to help investigate. As they dug deeper, they uncovered a trail of evidence suggesting that Sidwell's interest in Port Charles went back further than anyone had realized, possibly as far back as Nathan's supposed death in 2018. The final revelation. The truth came out during a confrontation at Windermere, where Sidwell had established his base of operations under house arrest. Nathan, Danta, Jason, and Anna cornered him with evidence of his involvement in Nathan's fake death. You did it, Nathan said, his voice shaking with rage. You orchestrated everything. My shooting, my captivity, all of it. You wanted to investigate whether you had children with Liesl, and you used me as a test subject. Sidwell didn't deny it. I discovered records suggesting Liesl had been unfaithful to Faison. I needed to know if any of her children were mine. You were convenient a WSB agent who could disappear without too many questions. When the DNA test proved you weren't mine, I kept you alive in case you had other uses. Other uses. Nathan lunged forward, but Dandy held him back. I had a family, a wife who mourned me, a son who grew up without his father, and now you have them back. Sidwell replied coldly. Your life was extended because of my intervention. You should be thanking me. The callousness of the statement left everyone speechless. This was the man claiming to love Britt, claiming to want to be her father. Yet he destroyed Nathan's life without hesitation, purely for his own investigative purposes. Anna stepped forward. You're done, Sidwell. House arrest is over. You're going to Steinmauer, where you'll face trial for international crimes including kidnapping, human experimentation, and attempted murder. But Sidwell simply smiled. And what happens to Britt when I'm locked away in a maximum security prison? Who synthesizes her medication? Who ensures she gets the correct dosages? You need me, Commissioner Devane. Britt needs me. That's the beauty of this situation. I made myself indispensable to my own daughter's survival. Britt's decision. When Britt learned the full extent of what Sidwell had done not just to her, but to Nathan and countless others, she finally made her choice. She returned from Five Poppies to Port Charles and walked into Windermere alone. I know what you did to Nathan, she told Sidwell. I know you destroyed his life just to investigate whether he was your son. And I know you're using my illness to keep yourself valuable, to ensure you can't be locked away permanently. I'm ensuring your survival, Sidwell countered. Everything I've done. Stop, Britt cut him off. Stop pretending this is about love or protection. It's about control. It's always been about control. You couldn't control my mother. So, you controlled me. You couldn't accept that I wasn't yours for 40 years. So, when you found out the truth, you made sure I could never truly escape you. She pulled out a small vial from her pocket. This is the formula for the Huntington's treatment. I synthesized it myself and had it independently verified by 3 different pharmaceutical companies. You're not the only one who can create it, Sidwell. You're not indispensable, and you're certainly not my father. For the first time, genuine fear crossed Sidwell's face. Britt, please. No, she said firmly. You made your choice when you decided to play God with people's lives. Now I'm making mine. The treatment will be made available to Huntington's patients worldwide. Dalton has agreed to testify against you in exchange for immunity. And you're going to Steinmauer, where you can't hurt anyone else. You still need me, Sidwell insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. I'm your father. No, Britt repeated, her voice breaking slightly but remaining strong. You're the man who shares half my DNA. A father is someone who protects, guides, and loves unconditionally. You imprisoned, manipulated, and used me. That's not a father. That's just another villain hiding behind the word family. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Caesar Faison wasn't my biological father, but at least I always knew he was a monster. You're worse because you pretended to be something better. Aftermath and healing. In the weeks that followed Sidwell's transfer to Steinmauer, Port Charles slowly began processing everything that had been revealed. Liesl Obrecht faced consequences, both legal and personal, for her decades of deception, though the statute of limitations on her actual crimes had long passed. Her relationship with Britt remained fractured. They met occasionally, awkward conversations over coffee where Liesl attempted to explain her choices, and Britt struggled to forgive decisions made before she was even born. I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you, Britt admitted during one such meeting, but I'm trying to understand. You were young, ambitious, scared. You made what you thought was the best choice. It was the wrong choice, Liesl said quietly. I see that now. I robbed you of your real father. Sidwell was never going to be a real father, Britt interrupted. DNA doesn't make you a parent. Love, sacrifice, presence, those things make you a parent. Sidwell had none of those qualities. Neither did Faison, Liesl pointed out. No, Britt agreed. But at least I knew what I was dealing with. With Sidwell, I kept hoping there was something redeemable underneath. That hurt worse than simple hatred. The treatment's legacy. True to her word, Britt ensured that the Huntington's treatment developed at Five Poppies was made available to the medical community. After months of testing, verification, and clinical trials, the medication received fast-track approval from regulatory agencies worldwide. Thousands of Huntington's patients gained access to treatment that could extend their lives by years, in some cases even decades. Britt became the public face of the breakthrough, giving interviews and presentations at medical conferences, carefully omitting Sidwell's involvement and instead crediting the team at Five Poppies who had worked on the research. This medication represents hope for families devastated by Huntington's disease, she told a packed auditorium at a neurology conference. But it also represents something more, proof that even research conducted under unethical circumstances can be reclaimed and transformed into genuine good. We took something born from manipulation and control, and we turned it into healing. The medical community hailed her as a hero, but Britt struggled with the knowledge that her own extended life came at such a terrible cost. Every dose of medication was a reminder of Sidwell, of the months she'd spent imprisoned, of the complicated truth about her parentage. Jason and Britt. Through it all, Jason remained a steady presence in Britt's life. Their relationship was complicated, it always had been. The unresolved feelings, the history of Jason choosing Carly over her, the shared trauma of Croatia, all of it created a connection that neither could fully define. One evening at Bobby's, months after Sidwell's imprisonment, Britt finally addressed the elephant in the room. Thank you, she said simply, for finding the truth, for believing I was alive when everyone else had given up, for standing by me through all of this. Jason nodded. You would have done the same for me. Would you have done it for anyone? Britt asked. Or was it personal? Jason was quiet for a long moment. It was personal, he admitted. It's always been personal with you, Britt. Even with Carly in the picture. Carly and I have history. That will never change. But what's between us, that's history too. A different kind. It wasn't a declaration of love or a promise of a future together. But for Britt, it was enough. She'd learned through her ordeal with Sidwell that control and possession weren't love. Maybe what she and Jason had, this complicated, undefined connection, was more real than any grand romantic gesture could ever be.